"Do you even know where you are, old man?" The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of arrogant impatience that only comes from newfound authority. Lieutenant Keller, his uniform so new the creases still held the memory of the factory press, stepped away from his patrol vehicle. He stood with his hands on his hips, his posture a theatrical display of command. Before him, an old man in faded denim and a worn-out work shirt continued to methodically wipe down the massive olive-drab hull of the M4 Sherman tank that served as a monument at the main gate of Fort Sheridan. The old man, whose name was Silas, didn't respond immediately. His movements were slow but deliberate, his gnarled hands working a soft cloth over the cold steel with a practiced, almost reverent touch. He was 89 years old, and the morning sun cast his weathered face in a gentle light, illuminating a web of wrinkles that told 1,000 stories Keller had no interest in reading. "Sir, I'm talking to you," Keller pressed, his voice rising in pitch. The rookie MP in the passenger seat of the vehicle shifted uncomfortably, sensing the lieutenant was pushing too hard. "This is a United States military installation. You can't just set up a personal car wash on government property. License and identification. Now." Silas finally paused. He set his cloth down on the lip of a galvanized steel bucket filled with soapy water. He turned his head slowly, his pale blue eyes clear and calm as a winter sky, meeting the lieutenant's mirrored sunglasses. There was no fear in his gaze, no defiance, only a quiet, unshakable stillness that seemed to absorb the young officer's aggression like a sponge. This calm only infuriated Keller more. To him it was a sign of insolence, of a senile old man who couldn't grasp the gravity of the situation. He saw a vagrant, a potential security threat, an unsightly blemish on the perfect order of his post. The flow of morning traffic in and out of Fort Sheridan began to slow as people took notice. A few soldiers on their way to morning formation paused, their curiosity piqued by the confrontation. Civilian employees slowed their cars, craning their necks. The scene was becoming a public spectacle, a small island of tension in the middle of the base's daily routine. "I asked you for your identification," Keller repeated, stepping closer until he was invading Silas's personal space. "Are you deaf, or are you just choosing to be stupid?" The MP in the car winced. The disrespect was blatant, unprofessional. Silas gave a slow, deliberate sigh, the kind a man gives when faced with a tiresome but necessary chore. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a cracked leather wallet, held together by a thick rubber band. His fingers, stiff with age, fumbled with the worn folds. Keller scoffed. "Let me guess, your AARP card. Is that what you think passes for ID on a federal installation?" He snatched the wallet from Silas's hand before the old man could even pull a card out. He flipped it open carelessly, his thumb rifling through the few items inside. A folded yellowed photograph, a $5 bill, a fishing license that had expired 6 years ago. "This is a joke," Keller said, his voice dripping with contempt. "There's nothing in here. No driver's license, no state ID, nothing." He tossed the wallet onto the ground, its contents spilling onto the asphalt. The old photograph fluttered near the tank's massive steel tread. Silas looked down at the photo, a faint flicker of pain crossing his features for the first time. He bent down slowly, his joints groaning in protest to retrieve it. As he did, Keller's eyes fell on the cleaning bucket. Tied to the wire handle was a small, tarnished piece of metal. It looked like a misshapen lump of pewter, no bigger than a thumbnail, etched with crude markings that were almost completely worn away. "What's this piece of junk?" Keller sneered, nudging the bucket with the toe of his gleaming boot. He reached down and untied the charm, holding it up between his thumb and forefinger. "A good luck charm? Didn't work out so well for you today, did it, Pops?" The crowd of onlookers was growing. A grizzled master sergeant, his own uniform adorned with the ribbons of multiple combat tours, stopped his truck and got out, his face a mask of controlled anger. He started walking toward the scene, but he was still 100 yards away. The situation was escalating too quickly. Keller held the charm up to the light, squinting at it. Pathetic. A grown man, carrying around a little toy. He made a show of examining it for the small audience he'd cultivated. "You know, this is a restricted area. For all I know, this could be some kind of recording device. Given that you have no ID, I have every reason to take you in for questioning." He was posturing now, playing to the crowd, asserting his dominance over the silent, frail old man. He saw the whispers, the disapproving looks from the soldiers passing by, but he misinterpreted them. He thought they were impressed by his vigilance, by his refusal to back down. He failed to see the simmering disgust in their eyes, the shared understanding that he was crossing a line, a sacred unspoken boundary of respect for one's elders. Silas finally straightened up, the old photograph clutched safely in his hand. He looked at the lieutenant, then at the small metal charm dangling from the officer's fingers. His gaze was distant, his mind suddenly miles and decades away from the sun-drenched gate of Fort Sheridan. For just a moment, the sound of the morning traffic faded, replaced by the deafening, bone-jarring roar of a radial engine and the percussive chatter of a .50 caliber machine gun. The warm asphalt under his feet felt like the vibrating steel floor of a tank hull. The scent of soap and water was replaced by the acrid smell of cordite and hot oil. Keller's smug, youthful face blurred, morphing into the grime-streaked, terrified face of a young gunner, screaming something that was lost in the cacophony of battle. The charm. It wasn't pewter, it was steel. It had been cut from the armor of a knocked-out Panzer. It was warm in his memory, pressed into his palm by a dying friend, the metal still hot from the shell that had struck it. He could feel the ghost of that pressure in his hand now, a promise made in the heart of the storm. "Make sure they remember us, Si," his friend had rasped, his voice a faint whisper against the thunder of war. "Don't let them forget this tank. Don't let them forget us." The memory was a lightning flash, a second of overwhelming sensory recall, and then it was gone. He was back at the gate, the sun was on his face. The impatient lieutenant was still standing before him, a cruel smirk on his lips. "What's the matter, old-timer? Cat got your tongue?" Keller dangled the charm mockingly. "Or did you forget where you left your memory?" The crowd was larger now, a silent ring of judgment forming around the young lieutenant. Phones were out, not held up to record but held down, as if people were considering who to call, what to do. They knew they were witnessing something deeply wrong. The disrespect was a physical thing, a sour taste in the air. Among them was a woman named Maria, a civilian who had worked in the base's personnel administration office for 30 years. She recognized Silas. She'd seen him here at the tank every Tuesday and Friday morning for as long as she could remember, a quiet, constant presence. She had once asked the previous base commander about him, and the old general had simply smiled and said, "He's part of the history of this place. Let him be." Maria's heart ached with a mixture of pity and rage. This arrogant child in an officer's uniform was humiliating a man who, for all she knew, was a local institution. The way Keller had tossed the wallet, the way he was mocking that little keepsake, it was more than unprofessional, it was cruel. She saw the pain in Silas's eyes, the deep, ancient weariness of a man who had seen too much to be bothered by this sort of foolishness, but was being hurt by it all the same. She couldn't stand by and watch. Slipping back through the small crowd, she walked quickly toward the visitor center, her steps full of purpose. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. She didn't call the MPs, that would only bring more of Keller's kind. She had a different number, one she had saved for true base emergencies, the direct line to the aid of the base's commanding officer, Major General Thompson. The phone was answered on the second ring. "Captain Evans." "Captain, this is Maria Fuentes from G1, she said, her voice low and urgent. "I'm at the main gate. You need to get the general down here, right now." "What's the situation, Maria?" Captain Evans's voice was calm, trained to handle panic. "It's Lieutenant Keller. He's detaining that old man, the one who always cleans the Sherman tank." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The old man? Does he have a name?" Maria racked her brain. Had she ever learned his name? She had seen his expired fishing license on the ground. "Vance, I think." The wallet said Vance. Silas Vance. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. For a moment, Maria thought the call had been dropped. When Captain Evans spoke again, all the calm professionalism was gone, replaced by a note of pure, unadulterated shock. "Say that name again." "Vance. Silas Vance." "Oh God," Evans whispered. There was a frantic shuffling of papers, a muffled shout to someone else in the office. "Maria, keep an eye on them. Do not let that lieutenant take him anywhere. The general is on his way. He is on his way right now." The line went dead. Maria looked back toward the tank, her heart pounding. She had no idea who Silas Vance was, but she knew, with absolute certainty, that Lieutenant Keller was about to have the worst day of his military career. Inside the sprawling headquarters building, Captain Evans burst through the double doors of the command suite without knocking, a breach of protocol so severe it was almost unthinkable. Major General Thompson, a formidable two-star with a chest full of ribbons and a reputation for being as tough as the tanks he had once commanded, was in a meeting with his senior staff. He looked up, his eyes flashing with annoyance at the interruption. "Captain, this had better be a matter of life or death." "Sir," Evans said, breathless. He stood stiffly at attention. "It concerns a man at the main gate, a civilian. He's being detained by Lieutenant Keller." The general's expression soured. "He had a low tolerance for junior officers causing problems, and this requires my personal attention." "Why?" "Sir," Captain Evans said, his voice dropping slightly. "The man's name is Silas Vance." The name hung in the air-conditioned silence of the room. The colonels and the command sergeant major, who had been listening with detached interest, all froze. Every head in the room turned to the general. Major General Thompson's entire demeanor changed in a heartbeat. The annoyance evaporated, replaced by a look of profound disbelief, which quickly hardened into grim-faced urgency. He rose from his chair so fast it scraped loudly against the polished floor. "Silas Vance," he repeated, his voice a low growl. "At the main gate? With Keller?" He looked at his command sergeant major, a man who had been by his side for a decade. The sergeant major's eyes were wide. "Get the cars," the general commanded, his voice like cracking stone. "Now." He didn't wait for a reply. He grabbed his patrol cap from its stand, jammed it on his head, and strode toward the door. "All of you with me." The meeting was over. A legend was in trouble. Back at the gate, Lieutenant Keller's patience had finally snapped. Silas's quiet, unnerving stillness had defeated him. He couldn't get a rise out of the old man, and the silent judgment of the crowd was beginning to prickle his skin. He decided to end it. "All right, that's it," he declared, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his duty belt. The metallic click echoed in the tense quiet. "You're a security risk. You have no identification. You're on federal property without authorization, and you're refusing to cooperate. I'm placing you under arrest for trespassing." He took a step forward, reaching for Silas's thin wrist. "You're going to be transported to the station, and we're going to arrange for a full psychological evaluation. Clearly, you're not living in the real world anymore, old man." This was his final, irreversible mistake. To threaten arrest was one thing. To threaten a man's dignity by declaring him mentally unfit was another. The master sergeant who had been approaching started to run, shouting, "Lieutenant, stand down." But it was too late. Keller's fingers were just about to close around Silas's arm when the piercing wail of sirens cut through the air. It wasn't a single patrol car. It was a convoy. 2 black staff cars, their bumpers adorned with the red plates and silver stars of a commanding general, screeched to a halt just feet from the scene, followed by an MP vehicle with its lights flashing. The doors of the lead car flew open before it had even stopped moving. Major General Thompson emerged, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury. He was followed by his command sergeant major and a half-dozen other high-ranking officers and NCOs, who fanned out, creating an imposing wall of military authority. The sheer spectacle of it, the sudden arrival of the base's entire senior command, sent a shockwave through the crowd. Traffic stopped completely. Soldiers snapped to attention. Lieutenant Keller froze, his hand hovering in midair. His mouth fell open. He saw the 2 stars on the general's collar and felt a cold dread wash over him, so potent it was physically sickening. He snapped his hand back to his side and attempted the sharpest salute of his life, his arm trembling. General Thompson didn't even glance at him. He walked straight past the trembling lieutenant as if he were a piece of furniture, his eyes locked on Silas. The command sergeant major, however, stopped directly in front of Keller, his glare so intense it felt like a physical blow. The general came to a halt 2 feet in front of Silas. For a moment the 2 men just looked at each other, the powerful decorated general and the frail old man in the faded work clothes. Then, in an act that stunned every single person watching, Major General Thompson, commander of the entire installation, brought his hand up in a slow, deliberate, and perfectly executed salute. "Sergeant Major Vance," the general said, his voice clear and resonant, carrying across the silent yard. "It is an honor to see you again, sir." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Lieutenant Keller's face went from pale to ghostly white. "Sergeant Major?" This old man was a command sergeant major? It was impossible. He wore no uniform, had no ID. Silas slowly, almost tiredly, raised a hand and gave a gentle, acknowledging wave, the way a king might greet a trusted friend. "Just Silas now, General. Just Silas." "Never," Thompson replied, holding his salute. "Not to me." He finally lowered his hand and turned to face the assembled crowd, which now included dozens of soldiers who had abandoned their cars and posts to see what was happening. His eyes found Lieutenant Keller, who looked like he might faint. "For the education of those who do not know," the general began, his voice booming with authority, "the man you see before you is Command Sergeant Major Silas Vance. He is not a vagrant. He is not a trespasser. He is a living legend, and he has more right to stand on this ground than any one of us." He pointed a finger at the old M4 Sherman tank, its metal skin gleaming where Silas had been cleaning it. "This memorial is not just a random tank we put here for decoration. This is a replica of Darlene, the tank that Sergeant Major Vance commanded in the winter of 1944 during the Battle of the Bulge. On a day so cold that steel snapped like glass, Then Sergeant Vance and his crew held a vital crossroads against an entire German panzer battalion. For 6 hours, the crowd was mesmerized. The story unfolded, a piece of forgotten history coming to life right before their eyes. When his main gun was disabled, the general continued, his voice thick with emotion. He ordered his crew to dismount and fight with grenades and rifles. When his loader was killed, he took his place. When his driver was wounded, he dragged him to safety under a hail of machine gun fire. He was wounded twice but refused to be evacuated. He held that crossroads until reinforcements arrived, single-handedly disabling 3 enemy tanks with nothing but courage and a few well-placed demolition charges. His actions saved the entire 2nd Battalion from being encircled and annihilated. The general paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. For this action he was awarded the Medal of Honor. A wave of awe and shame washed over the crowd. Shame for having just stood by, and awe for the unassuming hero in their midst. They were standing in the presence of greatness, and they hadn't even known it. Lieutenant Keller looked like he had been physically struck. His entire world, his understanding of authority and respect, had been shattered in a matter of seconds. General Thompson now turned his full, undivided attention to the young officer. His voice dropped, losing its oratorical boom and becoming a low, dangerous weapon. "Lieutenant Keller," he said, the words precise and cold, "you who have never heard a shot fired in anger, stood here and you presumed to harass, to insult, and to threaten a man who has bled more for his country than you could ever comprehend. You questioned his character, you mocked his possessions, you threatened him with arrest for an act of devotion you were too blind and too arrogant to understand." Keller could not speak. He could only tremble. Every Tuesday and Friday for the last 20 years, the general continued, his voice laced with ice, "Sergeant Major Vance has come here. He doesn't do it for attention. He does it to honor the 4 men who died in his tank that day. He cleans their memorial because he made them a promise. And you, Lieutenant, you tried to stand in his way." The general stepped closer, his face inches from Keller's. "You have not only disgraced your uniform, you have dishonored the memory of the fallen. You are a stain on this command. Report to my office at 1400 hours. You will be accompanied by your commanding officer." Dismissed. Keller, on autopilot, managed another shaky salute, turned on his heel, and practically fled. The silence that followed was broken by Silas. He stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on the general's arm. "He's just a boy, Tom," he said softly, using the general's first name. "The uniform teaches them how to be soldiers. It doesn't always teach them how to see what's right in front of them. The lesson is learned now." His gaze fell to the ground, where the little metal charm lay forgotten in the dust. The general followed his eyes, bent down and picked it up, handling it with the reverence one might afford a holy relic. As he placed it back into Silas's palm, the old man's words hung in the air, a quiet sermon on grace and forgiveness. As Silas closed his hand around the charm, the world flickered again. He wasn't at the gate. He was inside the cramped, smoke-filled turret of the Sherman. Young Corporal Miller, his gunner, was slumped beside him, his life fading from a dozen shrapnel wounds. Miller coughed, a bloody froth on his lips, and pushed the small, crudely cut piece of steel into Silas's hand. It was a piece of the first enemy tank they had ever destroyed together, their lucky charm. Make sure they remember us, Si," Miller had whispered, his eyes pleading. "Don't let them forget Darlene." Silas had squeezed his hand, a silent vow made in the heart of hell. That promise was the reason he was here, today and every other day. It was a debt that could never be fully repaid, only honored. In the weeks that followed, a quiet but profound change took place at Fort Sheridan. Lieutenant Keller was not discharged, but his path was irrevocably altered. He was reassigned to the base historian's office, where he spent the next year under the tutelage of the command sergeant major, tasked with documenting the oral histories of local veterans. He was mandated to learn the stories of the men his ignorance had insulted. The base also instituted a new tradition. Every Friday morning, a formal honor guard would march to the Sherman tank, presenting arms in a silent ceremony dedicated to the memory of the crew of Darlene. One cool Tuesday morning, a month after the incident, Silas was at the tank as usual, his bucket of water beside him. A young man in civilian clothes approached him hesitantly. It was Keller. He looked different without his uniform, smaller, younger. He didn't say a word. He simply walked up, placed a brand new, high-quality microfiber polishing cloth and a cold bottle of water on the tank's fender, next to Silas's bucket. Silas paused his work. He looked at the offerings, then at the young man's face. He saw no arrogance there now, only a deep, painful humility. Silas gave a slow, simple nod of acceptance. Keller held his gaze for a moment, his own eyes filled with a universe of unspoken apology. He nodded back, then turned and walked away. a man who had finally learned to see. Silas picked up the new cloth, dipped it in the water, and continued his work, a silent guardian keeping a sacred promise. Thank you for watching Veteran Valor. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of the quiet heroes who walk among us.